And we had to evacuate one location because a
Wow.
riot broke out and people started like throwing rocks at us and started stealing the camera gear. So we had to evacuate this location. It got pretty crazy.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Dalal, and you are listening to the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. On today's show, we are joined by a very special guest. He is one of the finest filmmakers in Hollywood today, with credits to his name such as Dog Soldiers, The Descent, Game of Thrones, and The Reckoning. On the show today, the award winning, Emmy nominated Mr. Neil Marshall. How are you, Neil?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you very, very much. It's a nice intro.
Hey, no, my pleasure. And once again, thank you so much for coming to hang out on the show today. We really appreciate it. How have the last 12 months been for you, Neil? We're living in such a crazy world right now, and being a creative artist as yourself, how have you been hanging in there?
Um, well, I've tried to use the time as best as possible. Been doing a lot of writing on different projects. I mean, it's been so surreal having spent 2019 making a movie set during the plague to then live during the plague the
You knew
following
before
year.
all of us, Neil. You knew it before all of us. You were telling us, you were warning us.
Yeah, this is like something in the water, that's for sure. So that was pretty surreal, and trying to finish the movie and then get the movie released while all that was going on has just been quite bizarre. But we've achieved it, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, did you shoot anything or work on anything during the last year, or was it more so just, hey, let's take a step back and just focus on the bigger picture of things?
Well, the first part of the year was really finishing off post production and such like on the reckoning, and then
Right.
the whole sales process and getting it picked up, and then the latter half of the year was the build up to the release. So starting on promotional materials and things like that. So I haven't shot anything during the year, but I have written some separate projects as well.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Now, you've had such a fascinating career, and we're going to dive into all of that. But what I'm so much more interested in is Neil Marshall, the man. Let's rewind the clock a little. Where does this all begin? Where does your love of filmmaking and being a creative artist really start?
Um, it definitely came from my family. That I come from a creative family. My granddad was an artist. My dad is an incredible artist. Painters and such like. That's their skill was painting. My sister's an incredible painter as well, and I'm sure it came from that, but also my dad's, or actually both of my parents, love of movies. We were always watching movies on TV, and then as soon as we kind of could go to the cinema, they were taking us to the cinema. And some of the earliest movies that I saw were things like Star Wars and The Spy Who Loved Me and A Bridge Too Far and all these amazing films in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. Being in the UK, I wasn't able to go and see Jaws at the cinema at that time, but I caught up with that later on. But then into the 80s, I mean, I turned 10 in 1980, so like the 80s were my teenage years in a nutshell. So and how influential those movies have been on me. But
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
fell in love with movies very early on. I remember my dad showing me Frankenstein on TV and just being completely like, I think I was 5 years old and I was
Yeah.
just like completely hooked. And then seeing Star Wars at the cinema for the first time and just like being blown away by that. And then when I was 11, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time, and seeing that at the cinema, and also saw the making of Raiders on TV, and that combination of like what it is and how it was made really triggered something with me. And from that point on, it was like I knew I had to direct movies. I didn't really know how I was going to direct movies or really what directing movies was all about entirely, but that's what I had to do. I had to make movies and I had to direct movies. And myself and my best friend, Mike Johnson, who has since gone on to, he wrote Sherlock Holmes, he wrote Pompeii. He's a very successful writer now. We got hold of his mum's Super 8 cine camera, and I know it's a complete cliche now because it's like everybody did this, but
Right.
this is what happened. We got hold of the cine camera, and when we started making movies, and just trial and error, really, learning from the ground up of how to get the film, shoot the film, edit the film, put music to it, try and put effects in there somehow, and just completely handmade movies.
I can just imagine you play with that big boombox playing in the back, getting some tracks onto your footage there. And that's what I
But
love. I love the DIY nature of creative artists. And
totally DIY. I mean, it was that thing of like, yeah, just trying to, because it was all on film, so it was like we're trying to sync the projector up with with the cassette player or whatever, try and put a score together for the film. I mean, we did visual effects were basically getting like a microscope and a needle and scratching things like lightning directly onto the film, and it kind of worked. It's
hey,
very rough,
well, we're here
but
now, right?
frame by frame. So yeah,
Well,
crazy stuff like that.
oh, for sure. Do you remember what your first project was, your first professional gig where you're like, hey, I'm on a movie set, or this is a project that I wrote, here I am? Do you remember what that first one was?
I did a few sort of TV set things beforehand, so because in Newcastle upon Tyne, where I grew up and lived at the time, there was a small TV industry,
Okay.
and that was kind of the first foot in the door, was to do some TV editing, and then I met
Right.
some guys who were directing some small dramas and things like that, and then so I got onto set. I think the first set was a half-hour drama called Driven, about a bank robbers, at the time. But then that was shortly followed by, we all kind of ganged together and said, let's make our first feature. And, what can we all do on it? And I co-wrote it and I edited it and I did the action coordinating and stuff like that. I didn't actually direct it, although I did one morning because the real director passed out. He fell asleep and couldn't wake up because everybody was just so exhausted. So I stepped in and directed a scene then. But otherwise, it was just this film called Killing Time, which was shot in Newcastle and made dirt cheap. I think like nobody got paid. It was all like deferrals and stuff like that.
For the
But it
love of
was a
cinema,
real,
right? That's what it was. That was the
absolutely. It
payment.
was
Yeah.
it was all done for love. And the crazy thing about it was like almost everything went wrong that could have gone wrong. Thankfully, nobody got killed, but people got mugged, people got
Oh boy.
robbed, like all sorts of crazy, crazy stuff went on. We had to evacuate one location because a
Wow.
riot broke out, and people started like throwing rocks at us and started stealing the camera gear. So we had to evacuate this location. It got pretty crazy, but we shot a movie, and it was one of the best learning experiences I've ever had, of just being right in the middle of it and trying to figure it out on a moment by moment basis. But we got a movie out of it, and it did get some kind of release at the end of the day. I think it might be available on an old VHS cassette somewhere. But it is what it is. But that led us to meeting several people on that crew, and myself and a producer called Keith Bell kind of sat on that set watching the mayhem ensue and said, let's do this ourselves and let's do it where people get paid,
Yeah.
and it's less chaotic. And from that came Dog Soldiers.
It's so true, where things just start to snowball, and maybe in hindsight where we're talking about how everything that could go wrong did go wrong. If that
Yeah.
never happened, who knows where Neil Marshall's career would have taken off? Because let's be real, it's all one thing after another. And as you mentioned, the cult classic Dog Soldiers, that movie just by itself, there's a whole new generation of people that are rediscovering that. So
Hmm.
in 2021 or in 2020, when someone comes up to you and they're like, Neil, when are we doing the next Dog Soldiers? Let's what goes through your mind?
It's the question I get asked virtually every single interview, is there going to be a Dog Soldiers 2? So I mean, and for years it's been like, well, um, not until the rights holder says there'll be a Dog Soldiers 2 or comes back to me or whatever, or the rights get freed up somehow. And only in like the past few months has that prospect become a semi-reality of that it might actually happen now. So we'll see. But it's like clearly there is I wouldn't say a demand for it, but certainly an interest in it
Absolutely.
from a lot of the fans.
Shifting gears a little into another iconic project that you've been a part of, and that's The Descent. Recently celebrated its 15th year anniversary. And this movie is so masterfully done, Neil. And till this day, it's widely regarded as one of the best horror movies of not just the 21st century, but of all time. And that's largely due to you, your amazing writing and your amazing directing. So I'm gonna deep dive into this movie is because it's one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's a very smart movie. With horror movies, you've got the standard template where it's like, all right, just have a couple jump scares here, we'll do this, and at the end it'll be some anticlimactic thing. This movie just is so ahead of its time with the use of atmosphere, strong female characters, and overall creating this mood where you're just feeling claustrophobic. So let's dive into the pre-production of it. Where did the idea for this movie come from? And especially with someone who's worked on thrillers like Dog Soldier, what was your take on the original pitch?
Well, the Descent came around almost by accident because I, off the back of Dog Soldiers, I'd written this much bigger. It was a zombie movie. It was based on my film school graduation film was like an action zombie comedy, and I took that script and I kind of embellished it and turned it into a feature. And after Dog Soldiers, I set up a meeting with this fledgling company called Celador Films that had a bunch of money and were looking for projects. And so my agent set me up with them, and I went down and I pitched them this whole zombies on an oil rig thing. And they were like, "We love it, but there's no way we can possibly afford it. But have you got anything else?" And I didn't at that moment, but I left that meeting and I actually I traveled down to London on the train. So I got back on the train and went back up to Newcastle, and I think it was like a 3 hour train journey. But by the time I arrived in Newcastle, I had the idea for the Descent, of this, a caving expedition gone wrong, of like, um, telling a really dark horror story,
Yeah.
quite literally. And the other seed that started it was off the back of Dog Soldiers. There was somebody wrote a review that said that, we love Dog Soldiers, it's great fun, but when is a British filmmaker going to make a truly scary horror movie again? Um, and I kind of thought that was like somebody throwing the gauntlet down, was like, okay, there's a challenge. Next time I'm going to do something truly, truly scary. Because I do think like Dog Soldiers is as funny as it is scary for me. As like the characters are, there's a lot of
Yeah.
humor in it as well. It's not a comedy, but there's a lot of humor in it. So I did want to do something much straighter, much darker, more in line with films like The Thing and Alien and stuff like that, which aren't exactly known for their comedy. So and have fairly bleak sort of endings, things like that, which I like. I like a good bleak ending. And so that was the kind of agenda I set to it, and then at some point, I think it was Keith Bell who said, "What if it's an all-female cast?" And I think that clicked as well. Was like, okay, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
And within this world of climbers, spelunkers, and such like, whatever, there are women out there doing it all the time. It wouldn't be that. It's not stretching it by any means to have it as an all-female cast. So I can run with that idea as well, and also having Dog Soldiers being like a very blokey kind of testosterone movie. It was like, okay, let's flip that on its head
Let's
and
try
do
something.
an
Yeah,
all
let's go the
female
opposite of that.
ensemble.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did a lot of research, and I talked to a lot of my female friends and my sister and stuff like that, just to get their input on how realistic these characters were going to be and whether they worked on page and things like that. And then yeah, so the intention was just to try and make it as scary as hell, and tapping into really primal fears of the dark and things. And like I had no idea. I figured that maybe 2 people out of 10 were claustrophobic and would freak out at this film. It turns out like it's more like 9 out of 10.
Oh, absolutely.
So, we really hit a nerve without even sort of thinking about it. We really hit a nerve there. And also the way that we filmed it was to make it visually claustrophobic as well.
Oh,
Of We planned the whole film, myself and Sam McCurdy, who shot it, we planned the whole film to be authentic in its lighting, in that we're in caves. And if you've been in a real cave, you know that if your torch goes out, it's pitch black. It's absolutely pitch black. So there's no other forms of lighting down there. So the characters had to light themselves at all times. And so we planned the whole film around that and planned the script around who was going to have what torch or flare or flaming brand or a lighter or a camera, whatever it is that was going to provide them the ability to see in the dark and us to see them. And what that also meant was like you'd get some scenes or some shots where there'd be a little pinpoint of light of somebody with a torch or something, and the rest of the screen would be like pitch black. And deliberately shot it in widescreen in order to enhance that effect, that the darkness would really kind of encroach at all times. So there's so many thoughts like that went into it to create what it was. I guess it's just like all the right pieces just fell into place with that project.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a domino effect where it's like one thing after another is just kind of, all right, this works, now that's working, now that's working. A couple of questions I want to ask. Now, horror movies, whether it's a witch, some sort of supernatural being, or a man-made killer or anything, there's always some sort of antagonist. And in this movie, it's so interesting the way these characters look. In many ways, the antagonist is light, the cave, darkness, but there's actually creatures that are within this movie. How did you guys go about creating something that's so unique and different rather than just your traditional witch, or again in The Reckoning, stuff like that? It works in certain things. Now in this movie, what was the thought process of creating these monsters?
Well, the process with these ones was to actually just simplify them as much as
Yeah.
possible. And the whole concept of the crawlers was that they were the cavemen who stayed in the cave. Like at some point in our human evolution, there was, when we were literally living in caves, humanity evolved, and most of us left the caves, went out. I've also been attacked by the dog.
We got a little friend in there. There you go.
Crawler.
Speaking the devil. All right. So where were we? Crawlers. Yes.
Where was I? Yes. So the idea was to simplify them. So it was this thing of the cavemen who stayed in the cave, that some of us evolved out of the cave and these guys evolved into the cave and into the darkness. And it was simply a question of like, okay, if you lived in the darkness for several 100,000 years, what would you evolve as? That your sight wouldn't really matter anymore. So you go blind.
Yeah.
It'd be things like hearing and almost like a sonar kind of vibe to it.
Right, your senses would just kind of amplify so much.
Absolutely. So we kind of designed them around that, of having kind of bigger ears and cataracts and things like that. So that, and also their eyes are almost starting to sort of seal up in that evolution of things. And then it really was just a case of like some pretty basic prosthetics. I mean, they were incredible prosthetics, but there wasn't much to them. So the prosthetics on the face, and then the rest of it they were just like naked dudes with like G-strings. There's these like G-strings glued to them, and then they were all sprayed up with like veins, and they would look pale and then covered in slime for the most part. And then that was it really. But I also I specifically cast people to play them. The model for the the look was Iggy Pop. It was like that Iggy Pop look of like being skinny, but really muscular, like very lithe. I thought that was kind of a creepy look. I didn't want them to be like bulky, like Schwarzenegger bulky, because they probably don't eat enough, but they are very athletic. So they're kind of, they're pumped, but and they're ripped, but they're kind of skinny at the same time. So I was finding people who look like that, really.
Mm-hmm. Now, what would you say was the most difficult part of the shoot itself? Now, was it just navigating through the caves, or was it just the lack of light, which ended up being a big theme in the movie itself? What did you find that was really pushing you as a filmmaker?
Um, Trying to utilize the sets, because we ended up, it was all shot on sets. We didn't shoot in any real caves. There isn't a real cave in the whole movie. It's all
Oh wow.
miniatures, matte paintings, and sets. We quickly learned, having gone on we went on a caving expedition as kind of research, myself and the cast, and very quickly learned that it was going to be impossible, if not lethal, to actually shoot in a real cave. Um, so um, yeah, so that was one part of it. We actually shot the film in linear order, so we
Oh
shot it
wow.
in story order. Because the cave is like a linear journey, we never go back and revisit any of the cave sets. So we knew that we had to shoot that cave out and then revamp that cave to be a different part of the cave later on, because like all the sets were used multiple times on the basis that um, our designer had kind of like invented them so that they could like interchange bits of cave
Gotcha.
or move
Gotcha.
a rock around or
Mm.
spray it a different color or something like that. And also the actors, because they were kind of lighting the cave themselves, like never lit it the same twice. So you could be in the same area of cave relentlessly and really not notice. And though I think there was one particular section of cave that was like just a little junction thing. It was quite small, and we used it like 12 times in the movie for different things, and you can't tell. Um, so I mean, we were never working in the pitch dark really, because we always we made it darker in post
Right. You guys
production.
control that environment. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was extensively cold and wet. We were filming in January in a non-heated soundstage in the UK, and it was freezing the whole time. And of course, the actors spent all their time being sprayed with water and stuff like that. So it was very unpleasant for them. We had to kind of wrap them in like thermal blankets all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Now, one thing I'm so fascinated about is, especially for a filmmaker's perspective, when you're shooting horror, now, whether this may be for The Descent, Dog Soldiers, The Reckoning, how do you know when you're on set, or do you even know when you're having those big horror set pieces that are meant to scare the audience? Do you know if they're working? Or is it one thing that you just have to just trust in the writing, trust in the actors, and just roll with it?
It's a lot to do with trust, definitely. It's a lot to do with learning from how other people have done these kind of things. Um, and then ultimately, in the case of the descent, we would test them out. Like we would try a jump effect or try some shock moment, and then the editor who was working in the studio as well, he'd cut these scenes together, and he would bring in like the people from the accounting department and like test them out, get people in and like watch a scene and see if they all ran screaming from the room. It's like, okay, it's working.
Bingo.
But it's literally like get the accountant department in and scare the shit out of them. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was trying new things. It was like one of the things was, if the actors were scared of the creatures, that's a pretty good start. And what I did was I deliberately kept the creatures, like the actors were never allowed to see the actors who were playing the creatures. They were
Gotcha.
never allowed to see any designs. They were never allowed to see anything. It was kept 100% from them. The first time that they encountered a creature was in a scene in a shot,
Oh, wow.
and that was the scene where one of the characters is there and the creature's like just standing behind them.
That's a big point in the
And
trailer as well. I think that's how the trailer ends or something. Yeah.
yeah, so that was, and that was a scene that where they first introduced them. The first take of that was they turned around, they saw this thing, and they ran screaming from the set. And because of that, I was like, okay, I know it works. I know it works now. So
Another thing that's so interesting about this movie is it comes out, and again, 15 years, 16 years this year, we're still talking about this movie. What's so special about this movie is people recognize it for being more than just a horror movie. It's a very smart movie, and as we extensively talked about just now, the all-female cast, you don't see those things in horror movies or in any movie, especially 15 years ago. Now, this movie's it's constantly in all the top 10 lists for all the big publications. Looking back at your experience with The Descent, one, what's the biggest takeaway that you take from it? And two, Is there any more life in this franchise that you would be interested in maybe revisiting?
Um, that's a tricky one. It's kind of like I wouldn't mind revisiting, but at the same time, I didn't think that we should have made a sequel. To be honest, it was kind of like this is a one-time only thing. There
Gotcha.
is a story within that world that I potentially want to tell,
Hmm.
which is kind of like a prequel about the miners that first go down into the cave.
Oh,
But at the same time, it was like it was on its own. You know, it was a very unique film.
absolutely.
It kind of wrapped up, as far as I was concerned. It kind of wrapped. The ending was wrapped up as it was meant to wrap up. So I'm not sure where it could go after that. I know that they did take it somewhere after that, and they weirdly like picked up from neither ending, so it never
Yeah.
made any sense. But that's a whole different story. But also, like at these, like as you say at the time, the having an all-female cast and in a film like this was unusual. It's
Mm,
kind of surprising that it's not really done very since
yeah.
then it hasn't been done
No.
very often, if at all. Maybe it's just the circumstances of the kind of film. But yeah, and I'm really proud that we were ahead of the game on that and led the charge and did something so special and unique.
Yeah. Uh, One thing I want to transition over to, from one amazing franchise or one amazing movie from the descent to another iconic social, I don't even know how to construct, being Game of Thrones. This thing just took over this entire zeitgeist. It's this paradigm shift in the way we consumed media. And that's just goes to show how amazing and well loved the show really was, and how massive an appeal globally the show really had. Your footprints are on that history, with directing two of which are still considered the best episodes of the series. They're IMDb top 10 as well, Blackwater and The Watchers on the Wall, which of course earned you your Emmy nomination. What are your memories on working on a project like Game of Thrones, and how were you approached to actually come on the project and bring your own taste to this mega behemoth franchise?
Game of Thrones came around primarily because of Centurion. I mean, obviously, Game of Thrones itself, like off the back of Lord of the Rings, is like taking the fantasy genre to a whole other level,
Yeah.
and becoming part of the zeitgeist over those the years that it ran is just astonishing. My involvement in it came about primarily because of Centurion, and it's behind me. Is this crazy dog? Anyway, yeah, so Centurion came out, and a lot of the crew from that went on to work on the first season of Game of Thrones, particularly the stunt coordinator Paul Herbert and the horse master Camilla Napru. Um, both amazing, amazing, talented people, and so they went off to do that. I was trying to get the next projects off the ground after Centurion, and I was aware that Game of Thrones was happening, and I thought that's right up my street, and so I contacted HBO through my agent, but the response that I got was pretty much we have our directors, we have a pretty much closed shop of directors that we go to. So that was that. I kind of, I wrote that off. I was like, I'm never going to get a chance of doing that. I never done TV before either, so it was pretty unusual. But then I guess they were shooting season 2, and they were close to doing Blackwater, the Battle of Blackwater, and their original director had to drop out for personal reasons, like at the last minute. So they found themselves in quite a pickle, and they needed help. And by this point, their stunt coordinator Paul Herbert and their horse master Camilla Napru approached the producers and said, "I know you need a director in a hurry. Check out Centurion. Check out this guy. He'll sort you out." And so I guess they watched Centurion and saw what I could do in terms of a battle sequence on a low budget. And I got a call one Saturday morning from the producers of Game of Thrones, completely out of the blue, and saying, "How would you like to come and do an episode of Game of Thrones?" And I was like, "Whoa, yeah, absolutely! Like, what's the deal? Is it next month? When is it?" And they were like, "Well, you need to start first thing Monday morning. You'll have a week's prep, and it's the biggest episode we've ever done."
Oh
So
boy.
the pressure's on, but you want to do it? And I was like, absolutely, just let me in there. And they allowed me to bring my DP who'd shot Centurion and all my films up until that point, Sam McCurdy. They said, bring Sam across so you've got that, because I know it's going to be crazy, but bring Sam across and use him in that. And so we just kind of dived in head first. Like I had like I said, a very intense week's prep, and and just got stuck in, and it was incredible. And they were so welcoming, and they really wanted some ideas, because what I brought to the table, especially with Blackwater, was a sense of strategy. Like, I'm a military history reader, and I kind of know about this stuff. So the battle that they had written on the script made no sense. So I kind of went in, and dramatically it was brilliant, but logistically it made no sense. So I kind of went in and worked on that with them, and brought in a lot of elements like the battering ram that they have. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, they come on boats, but they're going to bring a battering ram. So like, what if we invent a boat that like has a battering ram on it, and when you arrive on the beach, you turn the boat upside down so it becomes a protective shell for the battering ram, and then you go up to the gate and you start smashing it in there. It's like, okay, and they built it, and it was like amazing. I've never seen I've had one of those before, so they built that. It was brilliant. And little bits and pieces like that. Really, it was just great
Yeah.
experience.
Absolutely. And from Blackwater, which is probably their first big action
Yeah.
set piece or war kind of episode, which transitions to then The Watchers on the Wall, which honestly, till this day, I think it's one of the best episodes in television history. And again, Neil, that's largely due to your vision and what you brought to the table, in my opinion. What was the contrast where you have Blackwater, where the budget at the show was still big at the time, but it's nowhere what it was by the time Watchers on the Wall came along. And now you almost had the free reins of hair. We're going to have this massive battle. It's going to have massive moving set pieces here and there. And they're following Jon Snow throughout this battle. What was the biggest difference from the shooting Blackwater to Watchers on the Wall? And overall, what was it like shooting with Kit Harington on such a physical episode?
Um, well, I had a lot more prep on Watchers on the Wall. I mean, there was a
Mhm.
lot more warning going into it. It was going to be logistically way more complicated because of the things like the wall, which obviously doesn't exist, and so they have to they built this amazing set for the top of the wall. We had the castle, Castle Black at the bottom of the wall. Um, we had mammoths. We had this giant mammoth, which
Yeah.
was 100% CG. But then we have the giants, which are a combination of CG and like they're real guys, and they're big guys. 7 foot, 8 foot guys. But then they're blown up to twice that size on the screen. So VFX wise, it was by far the most complex thing that I've ever done. But at the same time, what I think I bring to it as well is this visceral action of the charge, the attack, the fight in Castle Black, and all that kind of stuff, and doing it in the pouring rain, bringing ideas to the table, such as the guys on top of the wall. It's like 400, 500 feet up in the air,
Yeah.
were immune to anything below, like people with bows and arrows or whatever couldn't get to them because it's just too high. So I said, well, what if the giants have bows as well? And their bows are going to be like heavy artillery, so their arrows can reach. And then working with the writers came up with the notion of like, well, what if the giant fires an arrow, it hits a guy on the top of the wall, picks him up, and he goes flying through the air and he lands in the middle of the Battle of Castle Black on the other side of the wall, and it kind of like geographically links everything together. And so we had all these like funny ideas like that, but it was just like packing in action, 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 and I love doing that stuff. And the kind of the bigger the scale, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Um, Working with Kit was a real pleasure because he's one of the most kind of dexterous physical actors I've ever. Like, he's such a natural with the sword.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think he is like, Errol Flynn reincarnated or something like that. He just, I don't know, it's a kind of graceful quality like a dancer has, of just being foot precise, um with his movements and everything like that. And he can rehearse this stuff with him. He just gets it every time. He was so good with that.
Yeah.
So good. So yeah, and just great fun to work with. And another thing is the 360 shot that I did this particular shot, which was not in the script. That whole beat was not in the script at all. But when I first walked onto Castle Black set, which is a 360-degree set
Mhm.
all the way around, and the most boring part is just the flat courtyard in the middle. And I was
Yeah.
like, well, I don't want to stage all the fighting here because it's kind of boring. I'd rather
Yeah.
stick a camera crane in the middle here and have the fighting going on around the outside where it's all like stairways and gantries and walkways. That's visually way more interesting and physically more interesting. And then I came up with this idea of like, well, what if we have the camera do like a full 360 around the courtyard? And then that kind of built and to become, what if it picked up each of the main characters as it goes and kind of shows where they are at that particular stage in the story and where they are physically in the castle, and we'd understand the battle so much better. So it had a sort of narrative reason to exist. And I think that's kind of justified it rather than just being a fancy camera move. And yeah, with that, so we rehearsed it about 7 or 8 times, and then well, no, so we rehearsed it over a couple of hours, but we got it in 7 takes. That's what it was.
Gotcha.
It was
Now,
worth it. It's worth it.
yeah, it's one of those shows where it just builds on so many different layers and foundations. And as you mentioned, with Blackwater, then it builds on to this episode here that
Well,
we're talking
yeah,
about.
and then obviously I had the responsibility of killing off several main
Beloved
and
characters.
beloved characters. Yes, there's at least 3 that I had to kill off in brutal manner. So
Oof.
yeah,
But
it's
that's the
tough.
beauty of the show, because it just finds a way to keep people on their toes, and it then takes this episode and snowballs into like a battle, like the Battle of the Bastards, then the Long Night. It just keeps reinventing itself. So in hindsight, overall, what would you say your experience with working with the entire Game of Thrones team was?
It was incredible, and yeah, I'm so proud to have been part of something that's made it's TV history,
Yeah.
and to have an integral role within that. But it was such a great creative team. Like everybody was just like perfect for their job, and did it
Yeah.
so well, and everybody was interacting. And when they brought in somebody like me, and I assume it's the same for the other directors, they wanted our ideas, and because we had such great writers. We didn't need to worry about the narrative content of it because the writers were phenomenal. So bringing ideas to the table and melding them together that way, it created TV magic.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next for Neil Marshall? What do you have on the go? Is there a project that you're currently working on? Anything you can writing? Give us the scoop, Neil.
Well, obviously we got The Reckoning coming out now.
Yeah.
So we've been doing a lot of promotional stuff for that, and that's very exciting. It's out now in the US, comes out in the UK in April. We're hoping that cinemas will be open in the UK by then,
Fingers
because they're all
crossed.
shut down now. But touch wood. And in the meantime, I'm also prepping to do a new action horror movie called The Lair, which we're going to shoot in May, I hope. Not sure where yet, but that's kind of very much in the kind of Dog Soldiers Descent kind of vibe of combining action and horror and monsters. It's going to have monsters in it because I fancy
Yeah.
doing a monster movie.
The Neil Marshall special. Get the monsters
Yeah,
in there.
get some monsters in there. Yeah.
For sure.
So that's what we're busy with. Yeah.
So as you wrap up here, what would you say is one piece of advice that you would give to any emerging filmmaker who even is trying to get things done during this climate we're in right now, or anyone just looking to expand their creative juices? What would you say is, in your experience, the number one thing to do to get the career going?
If you can write, like because ultimately anything originates from a great script, and nothing good originates from a bad script. So write and keep writing and do that, and that's a good way to get started. Even if you're planning on, even if you just want to be a director or whatever, and I think it's very, very useful if you can write your own stuff, and then especially nowadays or whatever, you just need to be very self-reliant and get on with stuff. So I think writing is really integral. I think also for directors, editing, like
Yeah.
you should get some experience editing. I think it's a really, really useful tool for any director to know and understand how their work's going to cut together. You know, how it's going to be shaped. So I'd say those are the two key things.
And as we finish off here with Mr. Neil Marshall, it is now time for a segment I like to call the final act. Mr. Marshall, we're going to give you 60 seconds to answer 15 rapid fire questions about your likes, your dislikes. If you go over the time, it's all good. We just want the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you up for the challenge?
Yeah, sure thing. I'll see what I can do.
Movies or TV shows?
Movies.
Theater or watch at home?
Oh, Lord. Watch at home.
Last movie you watched at a
theater.
theater?
Hang on. Are you talking about theater as in like...
Yeah, like a movie
traditional theater or movie theater?
Movie theater.
Oh, no, movie theater.
Movie theater, good stuff. Theater. Last movie you watched at a movie theater?
It's been so long. Well, I did see the Reckoning at a drive-in. Does that count?
All right, the Reckoning at a drive-in.
That was the premiere of the Reckoning.
We'll go with that. What's one sequel better than the original?
I'm gonna say The Empire Strikes Back.
All right. Best trilogy of all time, not named Star Wars.
Lord of the Rings.
All right. Should Hollywood reboot Back to the Future?
Absolutely not.
Right. Favorite horror movie?
Let's say Alien.
All right. Summer or fall?
Fall.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Absolutely not.
Amen to that. Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones.
Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter?
Lord of the Rings.
Will we see a Hellboy 2 with David Harbour?
Absolutely not.
Favorite Game of Thrones character?
The Onion Knight, Liam Cunningham. He's Davos Seaworth.
Sir Davos. There we go. Sir Davos Seaworth. There we go. Describe Reckoning in one word.
Awesome.
All right. And lastly, describe film in one word.
My life. Oh, that's 2 words.
We'll take it. My life, a memoir, Neil Marshall. Awesome. Neil, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. And thank you so much for your contributions to the creative arts. Your work has inspired so many of us. And honestly, some of the Game of Thrones episodes you've done, The Descent, Dog Soldiers. Hey, I like Hellboy. Your work is just continues to just usher in a new generation of filmmakers looking to feed off of it. So thank you so much. And I'm so excited for what the next step is for Neil Marshall. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.